How's it going, everybody, and welcome to How Good Is It Really? My name is Jeremiah.
I'm Luke.
And today we're going to be talking about The Curious Case of Benjamin Button.
Okay, cool.
Came out in 2008.
Yep.
Directed by David Fincher. Stars Brad Pitt, Cate Blanchett, Taraji P. Henson. Those are like your three main, and a lot of other actors.
A lot of
other
actors in this. Yep.
For sure. Let's just go through the categories so we can actually talk about the movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
Writing.
Superb. I would say
There wasn't...
in terms of movies that are told in a chronological order of a narrative of somebody's life, this is probably the most original of that type of story that I've seen, because of the nature of what it is, but also just because of how it's written. This is one of the most engaging and well-written kind of third-person biographicals. It's so good. I would give this movie probably an 8, in my opinion, as far as writing. It's not like spectacularly groundbreaking, but it is.
But it's so good. It's so good.
So
it's
good.
So solid, and just it's so the writing, and this will come into like the pacing of the film as a whole and the editing, just everything.
This could have been a boring
is
movie.
So enthralling, and it's over 2.5 hours.
Yeah, and
like the runtime is 166
something
minutes?
like that. And for a movie that spends the first 45 minutes in a retirement home, this movie has great pacing and amazing dialogue and exposition by Brad Pitt as he's narrating his own life. Mm-hmm. As we see the beginning of the film, there's not too much spoilers here because it's just how the film goes. We see a old Cate Blanchett in a bed. She's clearly dying of cancer in the final stages of her life, and her daughter is there reading her father's,
played by Julia Ormond.
Yeah, reading her
a
mother's
diary.
lover's diary of this man known as Benjamin.
Yep.
And that's kind of where we go, and we see that he was born on the eve of
on the day the Great War ended
in 1918. I'm not sure what day it was, but we see that there's a citywide celebration in Louisiana.
Yeah. And
his father is running home to be with his wife, who is in the final stages of labor. Benjamin is born old, his mother dies in childbirth, and his father gives him to Queenie, who is his surrogate mother, who is the owner and caretaker for a large group of elderly people that live in an old folks home. And that's where the majority of this movie takes place in. It's like a 45-minute long growth sequence of Benjamin growing up in a reverse order amongst all of these elderly people.
Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves.
Right, but for the sake of it being, that could have been incredibly boring. So boring.
It could have been.
But it's good because
anything written well can be engaging.
The humanity and the stories of all of the different people there, that is where it's the strength of this movie is in the histories of the people that are in it. The fictional characters, obviously, but
yeah.
Seriously though, that sequence could have been so boring, but it was so good.
8.5.
Yeah, 8.5 easily.
Okay. Acting.
9.
Yeah,
it's just good. 9.
I'm there with you. It's all so really good. And Brad Pitt does a fantastic job with. I don't know how much, if any, kind of after effects they used on his voice for the different ages that he plays. I'm assuming there might have been a little bit, but it doesn't sound like there is.
It's believably that Brad Pitt could sound like that when he is, actually 80 years old. He really does sound.
It's a small part, but everybody does such a fantastic job.
Oh, yeah.
Brad Pitt, Cate Blanchett, Taraji P. Henson, Mahershala Ali, Jared Harris, Tilda Swinton, Elle Fanning shows up as a younger character in the movie. It's all. Everybody does a fantastic, believable job in this movie. Very,
and the accents are so good too. For that part of the South, it's not overplayed. It really does sound like the Cajun,
it takes place in New Orleans.
Kind of slang that you're familiar with, or that you would think of like a Colonel Sanders accent. They just nailed it. Like so many of the actors, it was so subtle
I don't know
too.
If I think about Colonel Sanders.
Well, just
those accents.
the southern drawl, if you will. It is not overpronounced. It's done in a way where
They sound like real people.
They sound, yeah, exactly. That's what I was trying to say. They sound like believable people. It's not overdone and overbaked at all. It's good.
Cinematography.
It doesn't rely overtly on real wide shots. What I noticed was that a lot of the movie is shot in sequences of close-ups that are there's not a lot of grand pans or open
there doesn't
open
have
shots.
to be for it to be good cinematography, but
just making an observation.
Yeah, but there is some really good shot composition. I'm trying to think of a couple scenes specifically.
I think the opera shots are probably some of the widest and the most grand looking, or the sequences of Benjamin riding his motorcycle. Those were really well done. Mm-hmm. Just nice panning, not shaky camera or like a following or some, just worn out way of following moving vehicles. It's good.
Yeah,
I can't really say too much about it being like over the top or amazing. It was just good.
What you thinking?
Yeah, it's like an 8.
Okay, I can go 8.
Where this movie excels is obviously in the drama department and the acting and the writing. That's really the focus and the centerpiece of this whole movie.
Editing.
Good.
9.
Yeah, 9.
I think it's a 9.
Yeah.
Because again, the cinematography is not outstanding. We gave it an 8, which is still really good, but the editing is better than that because it uses the shots that it has so well, especially when you're inside the house or later on in Benjamin's life when he's interacting with Tilda Swinton's character and they have their whole relationship that happens and just it's so good. It's so good. It's wonderfully edited together in place of the overall tone, feel, and emotion.
The editing is done in a way that makes you feel the weight of the world changing around Benjamin. And that's what it appears to be. For someone who ages in a reverse order, it doesn't appear, at least from my perspective when I was watching it, that Benjamin is not the one aging. The world around him seems to be aging. And he is obviously growing younger, but in a way that is where he starts off with a much deeper grasp on life, because obviously the state of life that he's in, being old and growing to young, he still has a child's way of looking at the world, but he is exposed to so many things at a much sooner point because everyone assumes that he's actually as old as he is. Mm-hmm. So he learns about work, and he learns about racism, and he learns about his father's life and drinking, and he learns about just what it is to be a man at a much earlier point. And so when he is at the point in his life where he should be roughly 30 years old, he has so much more of an advanced grasp on life, and it's because he's kind of watched things age in a reverse way. And they kind of get into that with like this early exposition about a blind clockmaker who made a clock to go in a reverse order because his son died in World War I, and he wanted to rewind time to bring his son back, or to bring all of the lost children back that died in the war. Mm-hmm. And they kind of tie that in a little bit at 2 points in the story, but that's all I got for that.
Okay. Score and soundtrack.
Excellent.
I don't remember there being any this movie is entirely scored, correct?
Yes.
I don't remember there being any music.
I think that there's a brief moment where in the 60s
other than what's
show like
played
the Beatles
on the radio.
Yeah,
and see things that are like in the movie, like someone listening to the radio or like give performances in the movie, or like watching the Beatles on television, stuff like that, where that does play to it, and I guess is part of the soundtrack, but it's not just music out of nowhere.
It's not featured for the sake of our benefit. It's just there as a consequence
the rest of it is
real life.
Scored, and very beautifully so.
Oh yes, absolutely.
I'm trying to think. There wasn't any spot that stood out to me specifically, but it was definitely noticeable.
But when you were supposed to feel the emotion of a moment, you absolutely will feel exactly what they were trying to convey in that moment.
Yes. Yeah, and the music definitely has a hand in that.
Oh yes,
100%.
Who scored this, by the way? Do we know?
We're gonna look it up.
We're gonna look it up real quick. I think probably for me the most prolific moment that I remember musically is the sequences where he is learning to play the piano with one of the elderly women who comes to the home and teaches him how to play piano, and that melody that he learns gets carried throughout the rest of the film in a few different places, and then they bring it back at the very end as well. So that was really cool.
Directed
as well.
by David Fincher, obviously. The screenplay was by Eric Roth, and the story by Eric Roth and Robin Swycord.
Okay.
So wonderful job on that end. And the cinematography was Claudio Miranda. Where's the music? Music by Alexandra Desplat.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that name.
It doesn't immediately jump out to me.
Do we have any other credits of her work?
Alexandra, I believe, is a man.
Of his work, excuse me.
Yeah, Alexander. Well, but it's probably Alexander, but it's D-R-E.
So it's French,
Yeah,
I believe.
Alexandra Desplat. Let me see. Notable. Wide range of films, including low-budget, independent, large-scale blockbusters such as The Queen, The Golden Compass, Mr. Megorium's Wonder Emporium, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, The Twilight Saga: New Moon, Fantastic Mr. Fox, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1 and Part 2, Little Women, The King's Speech, The Danish Girl, The Imitation Game that movie has a fantastic score. Moonrise Kingdom, Argo, Rise of the Guardians, Zero Dark 30, The Midnight Sky, Godzilla, Phenomena.
Very noteworthy career then.
Yes, he's done lots of wonderful work.
And I feel like scores are done in a way that I appreciate most when they are not noticeable as a standalone to the narrative. Because if you look at score compositions in general for movies...
They need to be noticeable but not distracting.
Exactly. There are a number of different reasons that we have scores in movies. I won't get too much in the history of film, but from what I understand, there's really two big influences, and one of them being the Romantic era of classical music that was really tied into opera and tied into stage performances.
Yep.
And in the way that it was done back then was meant to evoke something that couldn't be either given with words in the form of ballet, or they were meant to convey an emotion or some sort of feeling that you're supposed to, understand when you're seeing a physical representation of what the music is meant to call or hearken to. Mm-hmm. It's difficult to do that in a movie when you have a score that is offbeat with what's going on.
Right. So we had your operas and big theater productions originally, before the advent of actual moving pictures, the ability
and then
to
with
capture
the
film.
advent of moving pictures, but then
the
no
ability
sound.
to caption picture, but no sound. Exactly, we were able to record picture, and then music would be played originally live along with the shows.
Ragtime.
You'd often have pianists of theaters that would actually play over what was being shown on screen live in theater, and then eventually you were able to do the two separately. And then that just kind of became a part that we kept in when we were like, okay, we can actually record sound so we can hear what people are saying and stuff, so we don't have to convey as much emotion through music.
But now it's
we
weird
still kept music because it's such a wonderful part of film.
Well, not only that, but it's almost awkward and weird if you are watching a movie with dialogue and no external music.
Right, yeah.
It's almost a little strange. It feels like...
Now, that can be used to the advantage of
exactly.
the film.
I was just about to say that. When that happens, it's usually because there's either tension or they're building to something.
Exactly.
And we've been conditioned to respond to that in a wonderful way. Music is just one of the most amazing things.
Yeah.
It really is. And in this movie, the music is not noticeable outside of the moments it is meant to be noticed in.
Yes.
And when you do, the first thing you think is the weight or the emotional emphasis of the moment, specifically like
it is noticeable but never distracting.
Like in the revival church meeting, specifically that they go to, and you hear the organ as this preacher is just riling up this congregation for he's like a circuit preacher and doing like healings.
And
the organ music is just so on point for that sequence, and then he drops dead from a heart attack, which the dialogue in that moment. I won't rob you of experiencing that yourself. You need to watch it because the
funny.
line that Benjamin quotes right after that is
was
just
funny.
gold. It's so good.
But yeah, the music really good. Not outstanding.
No, but it's there when it needs to be.
Exactly, it does its job, and it's more than just there. Again, it's present, but it's
Right.
noticeable, but never distracting. Is a great way of putting it, I think.
Okay, so what do we got next?
Well, what would you rate it at?
I'd give it like an 8.5.
Yeah, I'm thinking 8.
8? That's fine. Yeah.
Next is visual effects.
The aging technology that they used in this movie, it works. It works really well.
Yep, on every main actor that's in this film is de-aged and then aged up at some point throughout the film.
With a combination of makeup and
Yeah,
computer-
makeup, prosthetics, and CGI. It's kind of a combination of everything at different periods of time.
it looks really good.
But it
Yeah,
all
looks
works. And
really
visual
good.
effects, we're encompassing all of that. It's not just like CGI. It's any practical effects, any
Right.
effects that are used throughout the film.
And the
it's
movie
all-
doesn't rely too much on anything outside of the aging.
It doesn't, but if you know anything about David Fincher's films, I pointed this out to
There's
you
a lot of
before.
CGI that you would never notice.
There is a ton of CGI in a lot of his movies. Not all, but a lot of his movies.
But, like,
that
the
you will
sequence with
never
the-
you will never notice unless somebody points out to you, like, you know all of this is CGI. And you're like, wait, what? Because certain films we watch and like you just know things are CGI.
Right.
Like you watch a lot of Marvel stuff, and I love a lot of Marvel stuff, but it's like, okay,
know
it
what
all
you're
looks
watching
really
is a green
good,
screen.
but we know it's CGI. David Fincher has the exact opposite effect in a lot of his films, where you just assume that everything you are seeing is real and practical and recreated because it just looks so good. Like,
Right.
oh yeah, and it's probably a smaller budget stuff. Like David Fincher, obviously a very well-known filmmaker, and he can get any budgets he wants, but he doesn't make outlandishly expensive films.
Yeah, however he's doing it, it totally works.
But,
I couldn't
so
tell
I,
you.
I guarantee there is CGI in this movie that you assume is all practical or recreated, and it is not. I cannot point it out to you where it is because I don't know. I just know that he utilizes CGI and special effects and where he decides to use them very well throughout his films.
Agreed.
Just very well. So for that, like, I think none of it's exceptionally outstanding. Again, like an 8.
Yeah, an 8.
It's really good. It's
Yeah.
really good. Oh, costuming, set deck, wardrobe, all that.
It's all very believable. It's period accurate. Everything works. The world is lived in. It looks real. It sells it to the point where, like we were talking about before we started filming, we both forgot to take notes because of
Yeah.
how engaging the movie is.
Yeah.
I've seen it like 7 times.
This is the first time I'd watched it, and I got like an hour into it. I'm like, oh crap, I haven't like written anything down yet
Yeah.
because they're just so enthralled in the movie, like from the get go.
And the costuming is absolutely has to be a part of that as well.
Because this movie takes place over the course of 9 decades.
Right. It's beginning in the beginning basically in the beginning stages of the 20s, 1918 specifically.
Yeah.
And,
And
then
ending in the year it was released, 2008. Like,
Yes.
The movie takes place over the course of 90 years.
right.
So,
And the costuming is fantastic. It just everything looks right. And again, it's not really hard to do with a film like this because there's nothing that has to be recreated
And-
or
again, going back to David Fincher, he's a director, a filmmaker that cares very much about getting the small things right. At least from my experience of having watched all of his films, not all, but all of his films that I have watched thus far anyway, that he definitely does make sure he gets the little things right that make a big difference in the viewing process, that just nothing stands out as being out of place or just off a little bit. Like, it just all fits so seamlessly.
right. And the focus of this movie isn't like a masterful prop department. It's not like a science fiction movie where
No,
you have
not
to
at
like
all.
make new things.
Or like a historical epic or anything like that. Like,
Yeah.
it's not this film, but everything still just feels really good when
Yep.
you watch it.
It works. Just works.
What would you say?
I'd give it a
7.5?
I'd give it an 8.
8.5?
8? Yeah, 8. I'll settle on 8.
Okay.
That's fair.
Audio mixing and sound design. I'm trying to think.
Same here.
There's nothing that specifically stood out to me.
Yeah, I can't really say that I really have much of an
Which
opinion on this other than
is
like the tugboat motor.
Kind of a really good thing given all the different environments
The
that
world's
we're in, that
believable.
nothing feels out of place when
yeah,
you hear
there's
it.
nothing I noticed that made me stop and go, what? Everything was believable. I'd give it an 8.
You think?
Yeah. It's there.
7.5.
Sure, fine. I thought everything was just exactly what it needed to be. And sound design is just either good or bad. There's just shades of gray, I guess, if you're really nitpicky, but it is what it is.
Directing.
Fantastic.
Yeah. I don't know if this is Fincher's best film, but it's a great film.
Of the one seen from him, this is one of my favorites.
And that's fair, because it is a fantastic movie.
I give it a 9.
Yeah.
Just so we can talk about the narrative, really, there's just not too many reasons to keep dwelling on the categories. 9 for sure, for me. Overall enjoyment, I would absolutely give this movie a 9.5.
I would say 10.
You give it a 10?
Yeah, I really enjoyed this movie. I thought it was just, like...
That's fair.
Given the fact that I went into it with the idea that I need to take notes. I need to be prepared to talk about this movie.
And then we're enthralled.
And then all of it just went out the window because you're just watching and you're invested. And that's how I try and approach everything I watch. It's like when I sit down to watch something, I want the film to pull me in. I'm there to get invested and go along for the ride that it wants to take me on, whatever it is.
Yep.
And this movie just does it immediately.
Yep, right away.
It does not let go.
Right away.
So I would say 10.
Yeah, masterful performances across the board. Masterful CGI aging effects. Amazing dialogue. Some of the best character arcs. I think that's something that can't be understated enough. Cannot be overstated enough in this film. Is the narrative arcs of the individual characters are so intricately woven together in a way that is absolutely believable. You are watching a normal person's life written in the most abstract and different way possible, with emphasis on the world changing around a man who is old before his time and has to watch the people around him grow old as he grows younger, but is in fact actually old himself. Everything about this film is, it makes you think about your own life. It makes you think about the choices that you've made, that I've made. It makes one grateful for things that you really never thought about, because you watch the perspective of a man who goes through life with virtually nothing and has one of the most altruistic and positive outlooks in the most believable way possible. It's like the person that you wish that you could be and aspire to behave like. That's kind of how the selflessness, the loyalty of the character, just the humanness of the characters in this movie, specifically Benjamin, are some of the most what's the word I'm looking for? As a hero, as an epic, he is a character, in my opinion at least, that when I think of lessons in movies, this is one of the ones that I look at to like how to just live life. And that's not something I say very often with films, because more often than not the point of the movie or the characters themselves are morally ambiguous, and as a Christian I have very fixed moral values, and this movie is just absolutely one of the movies that I would consider to be in alignment with just hardworking Christian ethics. I mean, there are some sequences and points in the film that are obviously morally bankrupt, but the vast majority of the film is you are watching somebody who is a good person, genuinely a good person, not
sure
not in a subjective way. They're just objectively a good human being for the right reasons, and I love every minute of it. I just genuinely do.
Okay. Well, before we get into spoilers and dive a little more into some of the stuff that we loved or didn't love about the movie, our rating for it is 85.
Yeah.
A little bit lower than I thought it'd be, actually. Given that we, break down every category, but I mean, it's still really good.
Yeah, I think the narrative is really the excelling point of this film for me in terms of just overall enjoyment. But I think in terms of just like the static numbers, there's nothing too awe-inspiring about any one category. But when they come together, they make something truly amazing.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay. Let's get into some spoiler talk then. Actually talk about the movie. It's 14 years old, so if you haven't seen it, hopefully you will.
Right.
You can go watch it and then come back and watch the rest of this because it's available to watch on Amazon. You can watch it on Prime Video. I think that's the only place you can watch it that it's streaming right now.
I think so. Unless you have
it kind of goes back and forth on a couple other places, given where you're at in the world, but you can always find it on Prime right now anyway.
Right. And that's for the U.S. Amazon Prime. So if you have a VPN, you can switch regions at will. I have no idea where it would be at in that sense, but it's on Amazon US right now.
Yeah.
All right, cool. I mean, you can start. I mean, you were the one that went into this with fresh eyes. I pretty much have like a tired perspective of like everything that I've seen in the film.
Well, we can kind of pick up right where you left off with Benjamin getting to kind of this retirement home, and he's given away by his father because his father sees him. You know, his mother dies in childbirth, and his father sees him and is just like horrified
Rejects
at him. Like, I don't want anything to do with this creature. And initially takes him to the river and is going to throw the baby into the river. He's going to kill him. That's what he's going to do. But an officer's there at the river and is kind of like asking what he's doing. And he kind of gets, Thomas is his name, Thomas Button, kind of gets spooked and runs away and ends up just leaving him on the stairs outside the door.
This random
this random place that just so happens to be like an old folks home in New Orleans. It's run by Taraji P. Henson, who's fantastic in this movie as Queenie, and then Mahershala Ali as Mr. Weatherly.
I think that's his name.
He's not in the movie as much as Queenie is, but certainly a substantial amount of time.
Yes.
And yeah, the first 40, like it takes like almost 20 minutes of this movie before Benjamin Button shows up.
Yeah, it's a slow burn for sure.
Again, 2.5 hour long film. So that makes sense, but it never feels slow because like I said, I'm along for the ride. But then you get to him actually being born and being left on the steps of this place for Queenie to take in. And then you spend the next half hour basically, you know, at the retirement home. It's old folks home with Benjamin just kind of growing up little by little.
Yeah.
He's like, you know, in a wheelchair because he can't walk because like, again, he's born an old man. So he is effectively 90 years old when he's born.
Right.
Approximately. So he kind of fits in with everybody around him by the time he's like 7, 8 years old, where I think they go to the revival meeting with the preacher when he's 7. Because the preacher asks, like, how old is he? He's like, I'm 7, but I look a lot older. Like, he takes his first steps when he's, like, 7 years old. Because he's, like, 83 at that point. If you're just tracking the math backwards. So he kind of fits in with everybody at the home, like you alluded to, where, you know, all these old people that are essentially kind of waiting to die. Is what this place is.
Favorite dude is the guy that throughout the entirety of the film
I ever tell you like I was struck by lightning seven times.
When I was just minding my own business, and just like throughout the entirety of the film. And there's actually, it's cool because as those stories progress, you actually see that as when Benjamin is a child, he doesn't really grasp what this old man is really doing. It's kind of sad actually because the more that the movie progresses and as this man's like number of times he's been struck by lightning progresses, he's really what he's doing is he's talking about how at his point in his life where he's old, there's nothing else that really defined what he did with his life other than the times that he was struck by lightning, and he's just you can see the look in his eyes, how he's just realizing how old he is and how little time he has left, and just reflecting back on an entirety of a life lived and trying to narrate that in a linear, just these little tiny moments, and it always cuts back to show it. Mm-hmm. And when Benjamin is actually an adult and older, you see that hearing that from this old man, this 7th time that he tells him, it hits with a lot more impact because Benjamin is also thinking about those moments that defined his life. And that was just something I noticed. It was super cool how that was written. Yeah,
and I read into it a little bit more just with the progression of it where the first time the gentleman is telling the story, the first several times, Benjamin is younger, like you said, but as he gets older, not only a reflection of like what he's done in his life kind of perspective, but also for Benjamin, having not understood it when he was a child and understanding it later on in life, at least what I read into it a little bit was also that this guy is probably suffering from dementia.
Yeah.
And doesn't know that he's told this story
7
dozens
times.
and dozens of times,
Yeah.
To everybody throughout the house, because it's just like the one thing that is always in his mind that he's used to talking about, so it's just the thing that comes back up. That's what hit me the seventh time.
Yeah.
That it happens.
And we hear it exactly 7 times. He tells each individual moment.
You got to hear each one and a flashback of every single one of them.
Yep.
But yeah, he's growing up. He learns to walk. Then I think he's about 14 when he starts working on the tugboat.
Yeah,
Around
easily
there?
my favorite portion of the movie is
And Jared Harris is Captain Mike.
Him working with Captain Mike and him announcing it's the middle of the Great Depression in the 30s, I
Yeah,
believe.
he's 14, so this would be 1932.
Yes, and everybody is clearly dejected, and Benjamin is this elderly-looking man sitting on a bench with the gentleman who got struck by lightning, and Mike is there with his tugboat offering work.
Yeah, they're the guys are just like sitting out the dock, and he's just looking for hands for hire for the day.
Yeah, and no one wants to do it. Like, no one's interested, no one cares, because obviously he's going to pay next to nothing for some pretty grueling manual labor.
And everybody that's there, at least with Benjamin,
They
are
all
actually
look-
just old dudes from the home. Like,
Yeah,
they're
they all look pretty
60
friggin' old.
plus, probably.
And
at least
Benjamin's
70
just like,
plus.
I'll do it. And then Mike is just one of the... He's just like, all right. He's like, you got your sea legs about you? Like, he's like, all right, I'll take you
Yep.
if you can do it. And he just becomes one of the most beloved characters of the whole story.
Yeah,
like,
Captain
just
Mike is
easily
great.
one of the best characters. So good. So good. Especially, and we just, there's a number of different things. We can't really talk about everything just because for the sake of time, but when he takes him to get laid for the first time.
He takes him to a brothel.
Because he can't believe that
Because
as
in
such an old
Captain
man,
Mike's eyes, this dude's like 80, and he's like, you ever been with a woman? And Benjamin's
it's
like, no.
No, not really.
No.
And he's like,
It's like,
I can't believe
That's
this.
the saddest thing I've ever heard.
He's like, it's the saddest thing I've ever heard. It is so well done.
Yeah,
And then he
he
talks
takes
about he gives like this brief like exposition about wanting to be a tattoo artist, not a tugboat captain.
He wants to be an artist, just an artist, He told his dad he's going to be an artist, and his dad was like, no, you're going to work a tugboat just like I did.
Yep.
And
And then he just like shows off.
he
that
rips
he's
off his shirt
covered
and he's like
head
covered
with tattoos.
Yeah. So he's a tattoo artist. Like, he did what his dad wanted to do, but damn it, he became an artist as well.
Yep.
That's
And then Benjamin actually meets his father for the first time at
said brothel.
Not the best place to meet your father.
Actually,
but,
he didn't meet his dad there.
He met him coming out of the building.
Because his dad noticed him.
Right. Because
At
he was
the
coming down the
brothel.
stairs and his dad was walking, I believe. No, he was in
He
the
was
street.
coming out. Well, they were both on their way out.
Okay.
Just Thomas had left a little bit earlier, and he noticed his Benjamin there beforehand when they're first get there.
Right, that's
Thomas
true.
notices him.
I remember
and then
that.
when they're both leaving, Thomas kind of hangs out a little bit and waits for him to leave, and then offers to give him a ride home, and then take him to go get some drinks. So they go and get drinks together. Who Benjamin does not know that Thomas is his dad, but Thomas knows who Benjamin is, and is in some weird way trying to have a relationship with his son without ever telling him
Right.
for like another 30 years or
Right.
40 years that he's his son.
Right. And and then the movie really excels from that point, and then we see him getting introduced to Daisy for the first time, who he grows up with, and eventually runs across at a later point because he goes off with Mike to work the tugboat across the Atlantic. I believe.
Working salvage.
Yes,
right?
yes. They get a contract working
At the early stages of World War II, they start working salvage across the Atlantic.
Yep, and that takes place over the about 4 or 5 years, I think.
I think he's gone. I think
Because we just see when he comes back, and it wasn't correlated to the end of World War II.
No, because he's gone for like almost a decade.
Right.
But the portion of the war that he's in is like 5-ish years.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
I think you're right.
And we see the sequence with Tilda Swinton at the hotel where he first is introduced to his real exposure to dealing with women at large, outside of a just purely a sexual nature.
Yeah.
Just having a
actually
relationship,
having a relationship with
is
this
his
woman.
first girlfriend, really. And they have an illicit affair throughout the course of this winter in Russia.
Yeah, they never specify how long it is.
We assume it's like a couple months.
Probably less than a year for sure. It seems.
Definitely, at least a couple months. And she just up and disappears one day because she is married to a...
that's right. Who's
he's a government official there for trade
He's like
commission
a
of some kind.
secretary of some
Something.
kind for the state there for some.
Clearly he's attached to the
I don't
government in
remember
some
exactly.
in some facet, and she just up and disappears one day, and then we see
Leaves him a note that says, "It was nice to have met you."
Yes,
I think that's what it said.
that's a harsh breakup right there. Anyway, so after that, Mike says,
It's just like a solid thank you. And out
yep,
the door.
and then we're gone. And clearly he's kind of hurt by it. But then we see Mike, Captain Mike, giving his hummingbird spiel in a little montage to some Russian sailors, and then followed shortly after that, the tavern is empty because World War II has officially started. Because
And now
December
they're-
7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor was bombed, and Mike, being the American Irish
Irishman.
tugboat captain that he is, we're
Yep.
going to war.
Yep.
And
Working salvage for the war, just like pulling back disabled boats, kind of thing. Like,
and tells anybody if you don't want to go at this point, you don't have to. And one man takes his exit. I believe it was the cook.
it was the cook,
And
which immediately prompted everybody else to not want to go because who's going to cook?
exactly. And then Benjamin takes over because he learned to cook from his time in the old folks home.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go to war, and they basically, he just narrates how it's a very slow process, and then we get kind of like the first drama in the scene where they confront a U-boat that has just recently sunk. What we assume is some sort
what
of
looks to be
transport
at
vessel.
least one transport,
Possibly
ferried
two.
with like a cruiser with him, and the sub has sunk both vessels.
And in a stroke of luck, in the dark of the night, the U-boat surfaces and doesn't see the tugboat, and
they douse the lights and man battle stations and are ready to go.
in a tiny little tugboat it's armed with a deck-mounted gun from the pro-American Native American who is their resident. I believe
what's
he's
his name?
code talker, actually.
Yeah,
that's why he's attached to them, because in
he's-
World War II, the Navajo and I believe it's the Navajo specifically.
Navajo specifically were the code
They
talkers
were
for
the
World War
code
II.
talkers
Yeah.
for World War II that served in the Navy because the Japanese couldn't translate the Navajo language
This
because it was
incredibly
indigenous
obscure language native to the Americas that
specifically the southwest region of the United States.
that they then spoke in code in.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like just understanding the language;
Unbreakable.
it was a code, an unbreakable code essentially inside an unknown language to the rest of the world.
Right, and so that's why he's there, and the entire time, just some of the best lines in the movie, just how pro-American this guy is. It's so
I think
cool.
they mentioned in the film that he was Cherokee.
I believe he was.
Him specifically was.
I think so. I don't remember,
his name. Chief something.
Yes, but he mans the gun and is immediately taken down by the MG-40 that is on the deck of the U-boat.
Yeah.
And the entire U-boat crew, with the exception of Benjamin and
The tugboat crew.
one of the twin brothers that is there too, survives, but the tugboat splits the U-boat in half because it basically just rams it and
go on a collision course for the U-boat because it's surfaced, and they're just looking to take him out with them.
just a ramming
they
mission.
do.
And Mike dies, but before he dies, he gives Benjamin one of the most prolific life lessons he's learned up to that point, which is when it's your time to go, you have to let go. I think those were his words.
Well, I wish I could remember the entire spiel because it's a couple different sentences that lead to that point.
Right.
But that's the gist of it. But
And it
there's
was
some
just like
filler
you
in
could
there
tell
that I
it
can't
had
remember.
a real impact on him because he just watched everybody he knew up to that point for a
And
decade.
Benjamin repeats
die.
it later on in the movie. He
does.
the exact same line. So
He does. And then basically Benjamin then comes home, and we see that just David Fincher CGI on Queenie, who looks significantly older at this point.
not too bad yet, though. She doesn't look. Like,
She's looking-
in another
she's
20, 30
looking
years,
crusty.
she's going to look much older.
But she definitely looks old, and she plays it really well too.
Yeah.
And so does Brad Pitt, because at this point I think it's more makeup than CGI. I can't tell,
probably at this point.
but
Yeah.
it's really well done. And then we see There is a sequence with Kate Blanchett having come home from her time working in
Yeah, because she's
ballet.
been off, working in some company.
Very prolific ballet dancer.
Yeah.
And she has a moment with Benjamin where they really do not get along, where she is a very worldly, very drawn into this very avant-garde,
Which
modern...
moment is this? Because this happens a couple times.
It does. But this is the first sequence that happens where Benjamin is really taken aback that somebody that he grew up with is so different from himself.
Right. This is when they meet right after he's come back from the war at the old folks' home.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Okay. And he's
before
probably...
she goes to France.
He's in his early 20s. They're both in their early 20s. And she is...
So he looks like he's in his 60s.
Exactly. But it's very obvious that for him, he has a much more, I would say, classical approach to his dealings with women at this point. His first girlfriend having been his senior by at least 40 years.
But also him actually being her senior by like 20, 30 years.
Exactly.
It's a weird.
It's so cool how they like they just subvert all of the roles. And anyway, she is the total hussy, kind of a jerk, really, big time to him. And she tries to sleep with him basically, and he's like, this is not what I wanted. Like, we were friends. Like clearly I'm attracted to you. You're attracted to me. But like let's like take this one step at a time. And she's like wanting to go 100 miles an hour, and then gets really rejected because he is not into the fast and loose thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then we don't see them come back together for a little bit longer. And she's still kind of got a chip on her shoulder for a hot minute until we see
when.
Another time.
Is this when they're in New York?
Yeah, there's another time motif where, again, this is kind of the whole movie is obviously about time, but there's a brief section in here where Benjamin says, if this sequence of events had not happened the way that it would have happened, nothing else would have been...
before then, when they meet the second time in New York.
That's right. There was another
she
sequence.
comes back to New Orleans and wants to get with him, and he's like not into it. Then like maybe 6 years later,
he goes to
visit her in New York with that kind of that same intention, just reversed, where it's like, he even says, I was hoping to just come up here and kind of sweep you off your feet.
Yeah.
Like but she's like part of a performing troupe up there and has a boyfriend and like a whole life and stuff. It's like their lives are just could not be further
right
one
absolutely
another.
Different,
and could not be more different.
And he realizes that, and he's like, I made a mistake, I shouldn't have come.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just really, it's at the point that in the movie that you're watching this, you feel for him as the audience, because we've all been there. We've all been rejected by somebody that we really wanted to be with, and it's just so relatable. Anyway, she gets in a car accident, gets hit by a car in France. And at that point,
I believe they're in France.
There's a real change of heart where she realizes and even admits to being a total ass to him the previous times they had interacted.
Well, and including that time, because he goes to... That's
true.
He goes
I keep forgetting that.
He goes to the hospital
and she's
to
a
visit
jerk
her in
again.
France and tells him off, like, I don't want to be with you. I don't want you here. Leave.
And clearly she's been abandoned by her so-called friends, because they're nowhere in the hospital to be found. Like, the troop has just moved on.
Yeah.
And, like, once you're, not useful to the troop anymore, if you can't dance anymore, you're useless to them.
And then it was a few years after that where she came back to New Orleans.
Yep.
And then they kind of meet together,
but
both having
see him
on the same ground
staying there, clearly either paying the medical bills or just watching to make sure she's okay.
Yeah.
Before he goes back, and then he just lives a little bit. He hangs out with his dad a little bit more. Who there's a sequence where he admits to him that he is his father, and that he says he's sorry for abandoning him.
Yeah, and he's going to leave his
everything.
Company, buttons. He's going to leave his company at this point, like very successful. His father is very wealthy.
Right, and a little bit in a sad note, we get to see that Queenie is starting to deal with some mental issues, clearly some early onset dementia, or some not Alzheimer's, but I think it's dementia. But as he goes home to her and is talking to her, it's clear that she is now either being taken care of by her daughter, who is running the place, and she still sleeps in her little room in the basement, and that's a little bit sad and hard to watch.
Yeah,
but and then Benjamin asks her, because that's his mother. And he says, like, how do I respond to this? Like, what do I do? And, after railing for, 5 minutes in typical Queenie fashion, she eventually, fizzles out and then goes to bed. And Benjamin comes to grips with the fact that, like, he didn't have a dad. And if he wants to have a relationship with his dad, he better get on it because his dad is dying as well.
This is his opportunity. So, yeah, in light of seeing his mother, the woman who raised him, kind of coming towards the end of her life and realizing exactly like you said, he never had a real father. But now he does have the opportunity to at least get to know his dad while he can. So he does. I think that's when he takes the opportunity. He goes back to his father's house.
He does. He picks him up and takes him to the lake house.
To the lake house. So
because he can't walk anymore. He has some sort of
infection in his foot from something that happened. It never specifies exactly what, but he has an infection in his foot and he can't really walk around anymore. So yeah, he just takes him in a wheelchair out to the lake house. They're just sitting
to watch
out
the
on
sunset,
pier.
And then he dies shortly thereafter.
Yeah.
We don't see it on camera, but we are told that his father passes away because we see the open casket and a jar of buttons.
And we're getting the events a little out of order. You're right. And that's when he goes to New York.
Right, okay.
Right after his father dies is when he goes to New York to see Daisy again.
And he's clearly lonely and looking for some sort of affection from somebody that he knows.
And
his
gets
father
none of it.
And gets nothing.
Because in the present day, she makes the comment, like narrating to her daughter that's reading the diary to her, that he had come up to New York to tell me that his father died.
And
I
she
just didn't want to hear it. She was just completely in her own world.
Did not care. She was like, I was an idiot. I was young. I was really stupid. And I just didn't care. And it's one of those moments where you get a real picture into real people's lives.
Where, like, hindsight, she can see that, but there wasn't much wrong with what she did in the moment either.
I mean, it was still objectively, like, it was rude how she did it, but it was an honest retrospective where, as an elderly woman, she is telling her younger daughter, I just didn't care in that moment because I was too young to understand what I do now. And that's just how life works.
Yeah, 100%.
That's just how it is. We just, hindsight is 20/20. Anyway, and then after that, the movie is just a progressive lapse or
Daisy
time lapse
and
of
Benjamin's relationship.
Yes, as they go through life together, they do eventually come together. I don't believe they ever get married, but they do.
No, they never actually officially get married.
No, but they do live together for a very long time, a number of years, at least 2 decades, I would assume, because
maybe not quite that long, but it has to be close to.
I would assume it was near that because they go from like the 50s to almost the 70s together. And I'm only speculating that based on the age of his motorcycle because he has a late model.
I'm trying to remember when Daisy was born because she gives us her age at one point.
I think it was the 60s. It was the late 60s. It was like born? 67 or something like that. Yeah, 65, 67.
No.
You sure?
No.
Was she born earlier than that then?
Oh, yeah.
Well, the Beatles weren't around in the 50s.
No, they made their debut in, 61, 62, 63,
It was
64?
on the Ed Harrison show, I believe.
Show.
Ed Sullivan show.
Yeah.
In the 1960s.
It was early 60s. But they were, like, living together at that point.
Right. And then
she opened up her
dance studio.
And then she makes the comment that she's, like, 43 when she has the dance studio.
Right.
So she was born late 20s, maybe?
Yes. She was obviously, she's younger than him by a couple of years.
Yes.
Because he's born in 1918. She's probably 3 or 4 years younger than him.
She's probably, like, maybe 10 years. Like, maybe, like...
Well, if she was born, she'd have to be born in the 30s.
Because he had... Well... No, you're probably right. It's like 5 or 6 years after
Yeah, something
him.
like that, yeah. But anyway, they have a daughter together, and then at that point, he realizes that the older that he gets, he's going to age in reverse order, and his wife, essentially, is going to end up having to take care of both their child as well as him.
Yeah.
And he makes a decision to leave so that...
He sells off his
everything,
company, his house,
the boat, the house, everything.
Everything that he owned to put it into a trust fund for Daisy and Caroline, their kid, so that they can, have a life and she can get married and they can be good. And he just doesn't want to end up being a burden on their life.
Right. And he just leaves.
Which is sad.
It's really sad. But he goes through one of those, like, self-aware kind of coming of age kind of things where as an older person, he basically says you can just at any point you want. And he says this, I believe, in address to his daughter, where he says you can be whoever you want to be.
Like
you
for
can
her
start over and reinvent
14th or
yourself.
17th birthday that he writes her like a postcard that she never got.
And you can reinvent yourself. You can be someone else if you choose to be.
Yeah,
Which is 100% true. If you don't like where you're at in life, just stop and do something else. It may seem impossible. It's really not. Having done that myself, where I graduated college with a history degree, having intended fully for a decade to be a high school history teacher, I stopped and said I don't want to teach. And I dedicated, 6 years of my life to getting a bachelor's degree. And then I just started a company from scratch with a $50 bill. And it's absolutely true. And so for me, that line in this movie is one of the most prolific things in a real world context I've ever heard or seen. Best advice: if you want to be somebody else, you have the power to do it. There's nothing stopping you except for the fear of the unknown. And I think that's just amazing how you can apply something like that from a movie, of all things. It's for entertainment. And you can apply that to a real life in such a serious way.
Yeah.
I would tell that to my own child. And then, at that point, the film just progresses through that. There is a brief moment where a very young Brad Pitt, who is de-aged at this point to about 18 years old is what it looks like, comes back to Daisy's dance studio. She's very old at this point, probably late 50s, early 60s.
Yeah,
And he
because
meets his
Caroline
daughter.
is probably 15, 16.
He meets his daughter and her stepfather, who has taken over raising her and married Daisy.
Yep.
And then Daisy has a one-night stand with him, which you can take that how you want. I didn't really find that very tasteful, but it was fitting with the age of...
It makes sense.
It makes sense, and it was fitting with the story and narrative up to this point. And then, basically, it just gets sad from there, where Benjamin then just shows up as a boy with
maybe
Alzheimer's and dementia, basically.
Looks maybe the age of 12-ish. And, has, Alzheimer's and, has no idea... Alzheimer's or dementia or
he can't remember who he is.
Yeah.
He remembers his name, but he doesn't remember Daisy. He remembers the house because the social workers who find him, I think they make a comment about him saying where he lived or something like that.
Yeah, because they found him living down by the river
in an abandoned
building, and they found his diary that he had written his entire life story.
That's what it was.
And it's you're mentioned a lot in here, so they contact Daisy, they find the home that he grew up in, that's still in existence, it's still the old folks'
and
home.
his sister is an elderly woman now who is running it.
Yep.
And she knows who Benjamin is.
Yeah, and she's
and says that she's one of us, he
yeah,
can stay here.
Exactly.
And then Daisy basically just, over the sequence of another decade of her life, basically...
for the first 5 years or so,
takes
just
care
visits
of
him every day and eventually...
until he dies.
Eventually moves into the home because she's living there as well.
Right.
And is just caring for Benjamin as he slowly regresses in age until he eventually dies as a toddler, in her arms.
As an infant, actually. As a newborn baby, and then he dies. And then it cuts back to her on her deathbed in the hospital on the eve of a hurricane there in Louisiana. And her daughter basically is coming to grips with the fact that the man who spent the majority of her life raising her, that she called Dad, wasn't actually her father.
It was actually Benjamin the whole time.
Yes, who she met as a child and thought was a teenager as well.
Mm-hmm.
Just the amount, and then they tie it in at the end when the clock stops ticking at the moment that Daisy passes away.
It doesn't.
When the water fills up the basement and the clock stops, or it restarts though.
Doesn't.
I couldn't tell if it stopped or restarted. But
you see a picture of the clock that the clockmaker in the beginning of the film had made that goes backwards, and I don't think it stops. I think it just continues going.
Well, they took it down and they replaced it with a digital clock.
But the clock itself at the very end, because we see it. Like you said, it's in the basement and it's flooding because of the hurricane. This zoom in on the clock that's sitting in the basement, and I think it just continues to tick. Time goes on.
Right. I think that's just the running kind of meta narrative, is that time is it just moves whether we want it to or not. And as Daisy passes away, and that's really all there is to that. There's not a lot of fanfare or anything. We don't get a funeral or anything like that. But that's basically it. And man, what an impactful
That's
movie.
the movie in a nutshell.
And if it sounds boring...
it's not.
It's not. It really
not
isn't. I mean, there's no way that we could convey that in just words without showing footage from the film in this video to you guys. Seriously, you just have to watch it.
And it's
it
worth
really
it.
is good.
If you have
100%.
If you already have Amazon Prime, just watch it. It is 100% worth the watch.
Absolutely. This is a movie that will make you
Fantastic film.
It will make you feel things and will make you think about your life, and at least it should.
This is one of the movies where it gets done and you just kind of sit there because you don't really know what to do.
Exactly.
And you're just thinking about the movie, and like you think about your life a little bit because the movie just like constantly presents that to you about like you're never too old or too late to like reinvent yourself, but also like time just keeps going. Like the world doesn't wait for you. Like everything will just continue to happen, and you get done. At least I did. I got done with the movie and just kind of sat there and got up and like walked around my room a little bit. Like, what do I don't know what to do right now.
It's really
that's kind of how I felt.
It is. I remember the first time I watched it, I had a very similar reaction to that. And every time I watch it afterwards, I'm just like, man, I'm so grateful for the life that I have and for the way that I was raised with the same kind of ethics to just be able to do something hard or change who you are. And that was something I had to teach myself because just my family being what it is, there's a lot of consistency in the way things are done, and I really took a totally different path, and I had to forge that path on my own, and it really just rings true for me because there's a lot of similarities in that sense in regards to my life. But there's no way that I would rob you of the experience of watching this film. Experience it for yourself. Watch it with your family, or watch it with somebody that.
I mean, if you've already gotten this far in the video, hopefully you've already seen it.
Hopefully,
but
yes.
Even if you haven't, it's still worth a watch. If you like, I don't really care about spoilers and hearing about the movie, like it's still worth spending the time and going to watch it.
Absolutely. And there's no way we could do it justice in we're going on like an hour here.
Yeah.
Really, there's no way we could do it justice in a single evening. So that's really all I have to say about that. It's a great movie. Love it.
Absolutely.
If you've stuck around to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching the entirety of this. I know it's a bit of a slog at times, but we thank you very much. If you could hit the like button and share it with the people that you know also enjoy our content, we'd really appreciate that. It's really the way we're going to get past some of the limiting of the algorithms and we don't have big sponsors and we're not funded by any of the larger corporations that you might see with some of the larger podcasts that have been around for a long time. If you did not enjoy the video, thank you for sticking around anyway. If you comment below, tell us your thoughts and opinions. We'll try to get back to you as soon as we can. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jeremiah.
Yeah, and if you are listening to us on Spotify, if you could just follow us and leave us a rating there, that would help us out as well. And we will see you in the next one.
Catch you next time.